If you're in Clallam County, there's a big decision on your ballot. Proposition 1. It's a proposed tax increase for the North Olympic Library system, and wow, has it kicked up a debate. We're talking about a clash over finances, library policies, and what community standards really mean. So let's decode what's actually at stake here.
Here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll look at exactly what Proposition 1 is asking for. Then, we'll dive into the two biggest areas of conflict, the fight over the library's money and a really contentious debate over its policies. We'll also pull back the curtain on the role of outside companies, and finally, we'll lay out the choice that voters are facing.
All right, so let's get right to it. What exactly are voters being asked to approve? When you strip it all away, Proposition 1 is a pretty straightforward request about money. Okay, here's the bottom line. Proposition 1 would give the library system the green light to raise its property tax levy from the current 28 cents to 45 cents for every $1,000 of your property's value. That's a 60% jump in the rate. To put that in perspective, if you have a home valued at around $400,000, you're looking at an increase of about $5.67 a month. Now, you might be asking, why the big increase? Well, according to NOLS, that's the library system, this isn't about some massive expansion. It's about getting back to where they were. See, Washington state law puts a 1% cap on how much their property tax revenue can grow each year. So as property values went up since the last vote in 2010, the tax rate itself had to drop, all the way from 50 cents down to 28. NOLS is arguing that this 1% cap just hasn't come close to keeping up with real-world inflation and rising costs.
And this is where things get, well, complicated. This request has ignited a huge debate about how the library is managing its finances. It really boils down to a classic question. Is this about a real need, or is it about accountability? So on one side, you have NOLS saying that to balance their budget in 2026, they'll have to pull almost $1.5 million out of their reserve funds. They see this as a structural issue caused by that state law. But then, on the other side, you have opponents pointing to a brand new report from the Washington state auditor that flagged something called a material weakness in the library's financial controls. They're arguing this suggests a pattern of mismanagement, not just a simple revenue problem.
So what did the state auditor actually say? Well, here's a direct quote from their report. And that key phrase right there, material weakness. That's not just some minor accounting jargon. In the world of audits, that is the most severe finding you can get about an organization's internal controls. It's a really big deal.
So what does that actually mean in plain English? A material weakness means the system has a significant flaw. It creates a reasonable possibility that major, and I mean major, financial errors won't be caught in time. It's a serious red flag for auditors.
And when you look at the numbers, you can see why this is such a big deal. The auditors found two main problems stretching back 3 years. First, NOS left out millions of dollars in liabilities. That's money they owed for things like employee benefits. Second, they misclassified cash balances, and that error ballooned to over $5 million in 2023. The auditors pointed out that the staff just weren't aware of the specific state reporting rules.
Now, here is a really crucial piece of context. The library's management didn't fight this. They came out and formally agreed with everything the audit found. They said the errors had since been fixed, and after those corrections were made, the auditor issued what's called an unmodified opinion on the new statements, which basically means they are now presented fairly according to the state's rules. Okay, so we've talked about the money, but that's only half the story. Let's switch gears to the other major flashpoint in this debate, library policy. And this one gets away from spreadsheets and into tough questions about community values, especially when it comes to kids' materials. Believe it or not, this entire firestorm really boils down to one single document, Policy 2.1. This is the library's official rulebook for how it chooses books and other media for its collection, which has over 200,000 items. First off, the library's official stance is this. They say their staff can't possibly know the personal values or maturity level of every single child who walks in the door. So the policy puts the full responsibility for what kids read or watch squarely on the parents and guardians, not on the library. And this is where the policy gets really specific, and for a lot of people, really controversial. It says that topics like sex education and gender expression are essential parts of the collection. Then, and this is key, the policy requires that these materials have to be shelved openly, right alongside everything else for that age group. No separate sections, no special shelves.
And then there's this line, which you could argue is the real heart of the opposition's argument. The policy explicitly says that the library will not refuse to buy a book or move a book to a different section just because they think people in the community might get upset about it. It basically codifies that community objections are not a factor in these decisions.
So that whole debate about policy, it leads directly into this next question. Who is actually picking the books? This final area of contention is all about the role of large corporate vendors and whether that whole process is transparent to the taxpayers who are footing the bill.
You might picture a librarian just flipping through catalogs, but it's a lot more streamlined than that these days. Libraries get most of their books through major vendors. For NOLS, one of the big ones is Ingram Content Group, a huge national distributor of books and all sorts of media.
But it's not just about placing orders. Companies like Ingram offer these really sophisticated services to help libraries build their collections. NOLS documents show that their staff use tools like Ingram's iCurate program, where professional librarians put together shopping lists. One of those tools, called iCurate Inclusive, is specifically used to help the library do diversity audits to make sure its collection is broad and representative.
And here again, you see two totally different ways of looking at the exact same process. The library says its goal is to fulfill its diversity policy by using these professional tools to create a rich, inclusive collection. Opponents, though, are worried that this essentially outsources the job of curating books to a big corporation. Their core argument is about transparency, that the public has no way of seeing the corporate checklists or the secret sauce that defines diversity before their tax dollars get spent. So when you take all of this, the financial audit, the collection policies, the vendor relationships, it all boils down to a single choice for voters on Election Day. What are the real-world consequences of that choice?
Well, according to the North Olympic Library System, the stakes are pretty stark. If the proposition passes, they say the new levy rate will give them the funding they need to keep the lights on, maintain current hours, staffing, and services. But if it fails, they're warning that without that extra money, they may have to make significant cuts to library hours, staff, and the budget for new books starting in 2027.
In the end, this vote is about so much more than a tax rate. It's forcing residents to weigh financial oversight against the need for services. It's asking them to balance library policies with their own community standards. Ultimately, it asks the people of Clallam County to define the value of their public library and decide exactly what they're willing to pay for.